Natalie, you are so welcome to the Happier at Work podcast. I'm absolutely delighted to have you as my guest today, and I'm excited for what we're going to be covering today. Would you like to introduce yourself to listeners, give a bit of a flavour of what you do, how you got to where you are, things like that?
Of course, it's really lovely to be here. Thank you for having me. So yes, I'm Natalie. I have had a little bit of a squiggly career path, as I think they're now calling it.
I think
Um,
everyone has. Yes, I love that term. I love it.
but it really, the sort of common denominator has been about how do you scale big movements of people, and what's the digital and data sort of underpinning that you need to do that in order to solve problems, whether they're for a business or whether that's for society. And so I sort of started life, as many people do, as a management consultant with Deloitte, trying to tackle sort of people related transformation challenges, and then moved to work for London 2012 for 4 years to mobilise the movement of 200,000 people that we needed to make the London 2012 Olympic and Paralympic Games a reality, which is obviously an amazing experience, and learned a huge amount there. And that was really where I was doing some much more rudimentary data work to really understand the makeup of that 200,000, and would we even be able to get those people? Would we have shortages, and how do you address that ahead of time, and how do you not drain London of the resources that you need, because they also needed hospitality people, with everybody sort of coming to see it, and then built the Mayor of London sort of legacy programme from that, called Team London, which was a movement of volunteers across the city to try and make our city a better place. And how do you support charities to be able to work more effectively with businesses, and how do you inspire the next generation of volunteers to be able to use it as a route to get to work and build the skills they needed to get to work, and also how do you make volunteering sexy again, to be honest, and connect with a community that aren't currently volunteering. So the sort of traditional volunteer workforce was actually dying out, and you can't say to somebody, yes, we need you to come 3 days a week and spend lots and lots of time with us, when they've got busy jobs and demanding personal lives, or they're a student. And so how do you connect with that younger generation and get them to volunteer? And technology and creating the right opportunities, and this sort of speed networking, speed volunteering app, which enabled people to sort of gamify to bit and check in, became the way to do it. And then moving on to work for a startup which was trying to fix the problems between business and schools connecting to be able to improve careers education. And of course, if you're going to do that across the whole country and work with different schools, you need to have the right digital and data underpinning. So it's a huge movement of volunteers to support the schools. It was a huge movement of people to inspire the next generation. But in order to make that a reality, you had to understand the state of the nation. You had to understand what was happening, and data tools were really key to that. And that led me to then take up my role as CEO of Profusion, which is a data agency and consultancy. And I love solving problems. I'm a fixer. Like my friends will all tell you, I'm a total fixer. And I really believe data is a way to solve our problems now and in the future. And we work with all sorts of businesses, large and small, so from FTSE 100 companies to charities to SMEs to government. And it's all about how can data really be at the heart of every decision your organization makes. So how do we put data in the right hands at the right time to create the value that you need? And that can be about increasing your customer engagement. It can be about improving your innovation, or really critically, it can be about how do you drive a more inclusive organization. And as somebody who's always been involved in big movements of people, I'm really, really passionate about how you bring the two areas together. We've seen the lack of progress we have made as a nation, as businesses, in a really critical area in diversity and inclusion. And we've been trying to do this for 10, 15 years, and we're making very, very slow progress. And it's still supposedly at the top of the boardroom agenda because we've not made enough progress. We've now had to adapt to the way of working to be more global, but also to deal with hybrid working after the pandemic, and change the ways that we engage with our staff. And I think there's lots of ways that data can help to enable people to ultimately be happier at work, because workplaces are running in a more inclusive way, to enable HR teams to have an easier life and be happier at work. And so it sort of really brings my two passions together, in terms of the work that we do with people in HR teams and supporting line managers to really use data to support their people, because our people are our greatest asset.
Yeah. You're speaking my language now, Natalie, when you say things like using data to solve problems. I'm a total problem solver as well. It's what I've done my entire career. It's something I care, and it's, for me, it's about finding something I really care about, that is a problem that I do actually want to solve. So, going beyond just helping big companies to sell more, it's about how do we create happier working environments, exactly like you said, but using data. So it's not just like, sometimes I feel that people think this concept of being happier at work is airy fairy. It's a little bit fluffy, and I'm sure listeners of the podcast realize that it's not. But there are other people out there who maybe don't realize the full extent of, it's actually real, it's scientifically backed, and how can we actually do it? So maybe, let's kind of jump a little bit back and say, okay, so from me and from what I can see out there in the market, there's not a lot of people who are currently using data
No,
at the
I mean,
moment to
actually,
make decisions.
no, CIPD are saying only 6% of HR professionals are using advanced analytical techniques to make business decisions, and 30% collect and use very basic HR data. But I mean, that's been the case for years.
Okay, it
So
hasn't actually changed over
yeah,
time.
the 6% has grown, but 6% is so small. And
Yeah,
what's really interesting is by the time this podcast comes out, we will have some research that will be out, and it's really the key themes from it is that employees are demanding an era of transparency. They're demanding
yeah.
more transparency in how decisions are made,
Mm,
and they want to feel secure. They want to feel that they've been treated fairly, and I know there's some nervousness about using data to make decisions, and we see things in the press, right? We see the Amazon algorithm that only hired white men, and people really panic. But there are ways that you can avoid that happening. And I certainly don't advocate for data to be used instead of people. And we shouldn't be automating our decisions about people. So, data can be used to predict your top talent. What I'm not suggesting is that should automatically fire out emails and say, you're promoted, you're not, right? That's not
yeah.
the right answer. But we do see that people often get overlooked in a promotion process, and particularly cultural factors affect that. So, I might not be prepared in a large company to jump up and down and tell everyone how marvelous I am. And other people might be. And other people might be able to go to all the drinks events to network, and I might not be able to. But that doesn't mean that I'm not doing a great job. But actually, if you are less aware of my work, it's, through no fault of anybody's, I may get overlooked.
Mm,
And so what data can do is to inform the people who are making the decision. So it's not just a subjective decision, but it's a data-driven decision to understand actually who is showing the characteristics of real top talent, what success are they having, and try and make that a more balanced and inclusive conversation. So it's a sort of partnership between the human intelligence, because of course this is about people and how they connect with people and how they work in the environment, and there's things that data will never be able to show you, but also using the data to make sure that the decisions you're making are grounded in reality and not in some subjective opinions. And that's what people are telling us they want. That's what employees are saying they want. They're saying, even though it feels a bit nervy having people look at my data, because it all feels very personal, and obviously, you see a lot of things about data privacy in the news, they say they would rather that data was used to make decisions in the current way it's done, because it feels like it's just someone's opinion.
yeah,
I think it's really interesting.
But you're absolutely right. Like there's a few things to unpack there, Natalie. One of them is this idea of it being subjective, and I would absolutely agree. I've been at the other end of that process where we're discussing people, and it's very much people's opinions of how people perform at work. And the other thing that springs to my mind is, if someone is an introvert, so I'm an introvert, but I'm a social introvert, so I would go to those social occasions. And over the course of my career, I've learned to tell people what I'm doing, what successes I've had. But I think there's a lot of people out there who just don't know how to do that. And it's so important to be able to get recognized that it's not about politics, and it's not about who knows you. It's about actually the job that you're doing, or at the very least educating people on how this works. And exactly like you say, Natalie, this idea of transparency and how are those decisions actually made. I would have loved to be transparent with my team and say, well, this is what happened. Actually, we all gathered in a room and we looked at the ratings that we gave you and we compared you to each other. And then we decided, oh, well, that person compared to that person, well, actually, no, I think you need to bring that other person down because they're not quite as good at, and oh, we have to have this split where it's only 10% can get the top rating, and we have to, or whatever, well, I can't remember the exact numbers. Yeah, exactly, and the 9-box grid, and not everyone can be in the top right corner where they they get the top rankings in what they do and how they do it. But I think bringing a lot more transparency around that. I mean, that entire conversation in itself is probably a conversation for another day, this whole performance management and how do we do it properly, and how do we move away from the 9-box grid, and how do we support people, and how do we not tie up our pay with what people say about us, and all of those kind of things. But I suppose for me, it would be great to understand if someone's starting on this journey, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out there listening who are maybe they're not even just doing it yet. Like you said, 6%, like it's a pretty shocking number, to be honest. As someone who knows the power and the value that data can bring to an organization, like if that 6% are only 6% are using advanced analytics is pretty pretty dire number. And if that's a UK number, it's probably even lower in Ireland, to be honest. And this is what I'm seeing. Like when I talk about things like people analytics, people's eyes sort of glaze over. They don't really know. And I think traditionally the people who would be using that data, so the likes of HR, that's not their strong area of skill. They're good at relating to people, not necessarily at looking at numbers. So back to the kind of the question I have about this is, if someone is looking to get started, like where do they even start?
Yeah, for me, it all starts with education. And I think I'm really passionate about how we support HR professionals to get this knowledge, because if there's one thing HR professionals know how to do, it's transform organizations. And transformations work because of people and culture. Like any technology transformation, so many technology transformations fail, and they fail not because the tech is right or wrong. They fail because of the culture and people being prepared to change and the processes put around it. And HR are the ones who know how to make that happen. And I really want to see a partnership between HR teams and data teams to transform organizations with data, because the data teams are great at doing the stuff, but they're not the ones who are going to create the culture change. And they need the partnership of somebody who understands the people in the business, who understands the levers that they have, who understands how to make people tick. We saw it with diversity and inclusion. Like, you don't become a diverse and inclusive organization because you hire a head of diversity. You become a diverse and inclusive organization because every line manager understands responsibilities and puts it into action in their day-to-day role. Every single person in the organization recognizes the things that they need to do, the way that they need to behave to people to make it an inclusive place. And all those different things are happening across the business. And so you can't suddenly become a data-driven organization by hiring a data team. It's sort of, how do you transform the organization and the processes in it? How does the person, be they in HR doing the payroll, or be they in the sales team, or be they in the logistics warehouse, how do they understand the information they're being fed and interpret it and take the next best action in their day-to-day role that's going to support the business? And so for me, education is the start point, because actually we really need our HR teams to help us drive this across the business, but actually they're not even doing it for themselves at the moment, let alone supporting the transformation across the business. And transformation starts with education. So we did some really interesting research on data literacy. So we've created this data literacy analysis, which we make everybody do before they go on our Data for Leaders course, which is all about supporting leaders to understand how to ask the right questions of data, what the art of the possible is with data, and basically how to avoid things going wrong and spending a load of money on stuff that's not going to work. So we make them all do this assessment. They of course get very competitive when they do the assessment.
Yeah.
But we benchmarked it against 300 leaders across the country, and actually HR didn't score very well on it as a function. But
that doesn't surprise me. Yeah,
they're all quite rubbish. CEOs, by the way, I have to say, are the worst. We're only 30% data literate, but the average is only 34% of leadership teams. And you sort of think, well, if that's what your leadership understands, then how can you possibly use data to drive your business strategy? And I think it's the same for HR, right? How can you possibly use it to drive your HR strategy? And actually, HR have a lot of data through ATS systems, through the information they gather in application processes, through the employee engagement surveys that they send out. There's loads of information and intel in there, but it's just currently not being put together and used to answer the key questions that they're trying to tackle.
Yeah.
And so starting by just doing some data literacy training, by understanding what the art of the possible is, by understanding how do I go from, I've got this HR strategy, how do I translate that into a series of questions to ask my data talent, whether that's a data team, whether that's an external partner, whoever it is. And that's got to be your grounding. The other sort of tip I would give HR teams in terms of getting going is to talk to your marketing team. Bizarrely, the two teams don't seem to talk in the organisation very much, but they are both trying to attract, engage and retain people.
Yes.
Your HR team are doing it for your own people and marketing are doing it for your customers, but it's the same process. You're trying to achieve the same things. And marketing teams have typically been faster to use more modern techniques in this. There are, of course, some ethical things you need to consider when you're then transferring marketing practices to HR. Obviously, with customers, you want lookalikes of who spends the most. If you looked at your top talent, you don't necessarily just want to replicate that, because as we saw with the Amazon algorithm, that creates bias based on who your talent has been. So you may not achieve, but there are ways to manage that. So I think having a conversation to see how marketing are using these techniques and how it's helped them and how they started out, there's probably lots of shared lessons that can be learned. And so it's another really simple step just to start with, and see there's probably quite a lot of stuff in your organization that you could actually already apply and use and just start playing with.
It's so funny you say that, Natalie, just because that is my background, is market research, and taking that data and exactly that, so kind of isolating specific types of behavior and looking at tracking that over time and things like that. So it's so interesting, and it's so true as well that the two teams are so interlinked, and yet they don't necessarily talk to each other or see how they can maybe help each other. There's a few things kind of coming up for me in relation to what you've said. So I suppose the first thing is that this idea of data literacy, and I don't know, are people afraid of what it is? But if you think of the likes of say a marketing director or a finance director, surely they know their numbers and they know how to show whether or not something they're doing is working, whether that is, I never worked in finance, but I'm trying to think of some examples. But even things like revenue or things like, collections or something like that, surely they know how to translate what it is they're doing to show the impact that that's having on the business. And from a marketing perspective, this is how to show, well, we ran this campaign and this is the impact that it had. These are the impressions it had. These are the, all of these different kinds of things. So maybe people shy away from this idea of, oh, data, I'm not data literate, but actually you're using it all the time, but you just maybe don't use that language.
Yeah, I mean, we use it every day. I mean, AI is just look at a device that can sort of perceive its environment and take action based on that, right? So actually, as humans, we execute on that all the time. You go and stand at the traffic lights, you take into account what's going on and whether you cross the road or not, and then you sort of cross the road and you make a judgment call of whether you move faster. And we as humans process huge amounts of data on a daily basis, which we learn from as we get older. You start as a baby, you don't understand it all, and you sort of build it in. Like we have our own algorithms running essentially in our bodies, right? We see what's going on, we process it, we use the knowledge we've already got, and then we take action based on it. And that's sort of what data does as well. But I think the problem with data and AI particularly is it's got this sort of mystique around it, and
It
it sounds
does, yeah. When you say AI, I'm kind
scary,
of like,
right?
oh no, now I'm
Like
getting
what
afraid.
is artificial intelligence? Is it the robots taking over the world? Like,
Yeah,
oh,
exactly. Yeah.
I was no
It's
good at science at
Terminator.
school. Yeah, like I was no good at science at school. I can possibly understand that. And actually, and the problem is the people who do practice it are geeks who like to talk in geeky language, right? And love them all dearly. They work for me, but and it's that translation piece that's really difficult. But actually, it's not that scary. It's not that complicated. And actually, it's where we see it going wrong, that people aren't applying normal business logic and normal business processes to it. And so actually, that's why it's not always creating value for people in their organizations. And a lot of the stuff we teach on our Data for Leaders course and our Data Fundamentals course is essentially basic business planning. You know, get your question right, ask the right question, don't send people off sort of down rabbit holes with vague briefs, right? We've always known that. For all sorts of other things that we do, you wouldn't just put a job spec out saying, oh, we're quite interested in young talent to come and help us with some marketing, and think, oh yeah, now we're going to be able to hire a marketing analyst, would you?
Yeah.
Right? But that's what we do to our data
Yeah.
people. We basically say, oh, we want some personalization, or I sort of need help to help me with performance management. Right, well, what question are you actually trying to answer?
Yeah.
And that's where we sort of see things go wrong. And so I think it's about sort of, as you say, not being scared of it, and recognizing it's something that's part of our daily lives, that by wearing an Apple Watch, you're contributing so much data to someone else. You know, you're looking at your data every day. We are, by opening an email, we're constantly having these value exchanges of data in our lives, where it's saying, where you're saying, okay, I will allow people to know more about me, so I can have a more personalized email, because I don't want to be sent men's shirts because I only buy them once a year when I'm buying it for a present for my brother-in-law, and I don't really want to be bombarded by you the rest of the year because I'm not that generous and I only buy for him once a year, right? Like, you know, so we'll happily give our data to do those things, or some people will, and so we're actually using it all the time, and we need to get a little bit more confident about not being scared to learn some more and realize how it can help us in our daily jobs, because it can remove a lot of the manual stuff we do. It can make us a lot more informed about what we're doing, and it also, back to the transparency piece, can really help us to help people be happier, because, you know, you look at the equation to sort of get people to be happy, and it's not about them always having their own way. It's about fairness and respect. People are happy to accept something even if they don't like it, as long as they think it's fair and as long as they understand it. And I think that's what data can go a long way to helping with, because it can really help for us to be more transparent, for us to show that we are being fair, and to explain the decisions may not have been unfair before, but they were hidden. And so we can actually sort of use data to explain, right, these are the decisions we're making, these are the reasons why, this is the trajectory you're on, these are the things that you need to do, these are the things that will change things. And all of a sudden people feel more content because they understand it, they can see what's happening, they don't feel that something's being hidden from them, and then they feel more secure. And when you feel secure, you are happier at work and you get the best out of people.
Yeah. I mean, the idea of asking the right questions to begin with, I think, is really important, and something you brought up earlier in the conversation, and that I wanted to drill into a little bit more. So thank you for bringing that up again. And, you know, I've seen it countless times, being on the receiving end, being an agency who is working with clients, and they will provide either a very prescriptive brief saying, I want this, and this type of analysis, which kind of belittles our own ability to decipher what they're trying to get to. And, you know, when you're telling someone exactly what to do and how to do it, it takes away that sense of autonomy, which is something I talk about a lot on the podcast. But then these really wide open, vague briefs where you don't really know what it is that they're trying to get to. And it's like, we just want you to look at all of the data and pull out a story that you see. And I kind of sometimes think it's like, and I didn't get this about, say, if you're going for a blood test, that they can just analyze it, they can just test for everything. And if you go for a blood test, then they'll pick up any sort of thing that you have. And that's not how it works. You have to be very specific and say, I want this blood test for a specific type of illness. And it's the same when it comes to data. Like, it's really important to ask the right questions. And what I see out there with a lot of companies when they are starting on this journey, they're like, we just want to have these reports. And it's like, but what's the purpose of the reports? And really, it's not about just creating a suite of reports that you can check in and be like, oh, let's have a look at our absence, or let's have a look at our overall engagement scores. It's about thinking, right, from the information that we already have, what are the big questions that we have? So if there is an issue around diversity and inclusion, and let's take the hot topic of empowering more female leaders into senior positions in organizations. So if you know that that's an issue in your organization, what kind of initiatives can you run to close that gap for them, to help more women to succeed? What kind of things can you do? How can you measure whether or not that is effective? And that's where the data comes in my mind. Like, that's something, I suppose, on a personal level that I'm really passionate about, is helping women leaders to get to those more senior positions. But how can we actually facilitate that? And this idea of transparency and fairness and respect, I absolutely love that, and I totally buy into that as well. Like, if we can be more transparent about how decisions are made, someone retires or someone leaves the business and there's a gap in a leadership position, how are you making that decision of who is going to fill that gap, and being transparent about that, even if it's filled by a man rather than a woman, if you can say how you determined who got that position, then I think, it would, I feel like I'm on my soapbox now, but
Yeah, I mean,
I
I agree.
feel like it'd be
I
more
love your,
accepted.
yeah, I love your blood analogy. I think I might steal that from you. But
Do
it's so
steal
true.
with pride,
It's
yes.
the why are you asking, why are you doing it? And we
Yeah,
often see people, or people being scared to start because they're like, oh, we don't have the data. Well, hang on, you haven't even worked out what you want to know.
yeah,
We can then tell you whether you've got the data or set it up to be collected appropriately, right? But
exactly, yeah,
you're sort of, people start with the data, and the answer is to start with the business, whether that's about we want to improve diversity in our organization, whether that's
yeah,
we want to improve employee engagement. But why do you want to improve employee engagement? Well, actually, you want to do it because the current talent market is a nightmare and you're trying to improve retention. Like that, that's probably why you're trying to do it. So actually, your question is about how do we improve retention? And you probably actually have a specific cohort that you're looking at, because in all organizations, like, there are some people that we don't care if they leave, like, they've done their few years, it's the right stage in their career, we probably don't have the right next step for them. It's you stay friends and everyone moves on, or there's people who frankly probably aren't suited and weren't the right hire, and actually it's better that they move on for everybody. And so that it's not that we want to sort of hem in and keep every single employee that we have, but there are
yeah.
key
You want to keep
talent
the
that
right ones. Yeah,
we
yeah,
want to keep,
absolutely.
and
Yeah,
that will be very expensive to replace. And I think it's always about sort of starting with the why, in the same way as the blood test. So why do I care about this? Am I going to be able to take an action from it? Otherwise it's a pointless exercise. So what if the leadership are not prepared to change the way we do promotions and performance management? Is there any point in me running this process? Is there any point in
exactly.
collecting this data? If if I ask all my employees about what they would like their training programs to look like, but I've already bought my training catalogue for the next 2 years, sort of what's the point, right? If
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
collecting data on impact of interventions and learning and development, and how that connects with progression, and how that connects with progression of different cohorts, and how that connects to employee engagement scores, and are people more connected to the business after they've had that training, that's really useful. If I'm not then going to do anything with it and change the
yeah.
training that I buy or who goes on it or anything, there is no point. So I think it's really thinking about why you're doing it, and then and again, it's that value exchange, being able to be clear with people. Oh, give me this information, and it's going to be good for you, because we're going to actually work out whether you, as a top talent person that we're putting on our talent leadership program, is going to get the training that's going to get you to the role that the person's just retired in and is going to be vacant. And again, if we can share as much of that as we can, it doesn't need to be hidden, it doesn't need to be a black box, we can share and take people on that journey. that also helps them to really understand, right, well, the impact of that training intervention was great for this cohort of people who were looking to do this. Okay, that's right for me, or actually that's not right for me because I've already got that experience by doing this, so I should be on this pathway. And so I do think the transparency really helps, and it builds confidence that organizations are trying to do the right thing and that they're not collecting this information for no reason.
Yeah, I think you raise a really valuable point around listening. So don't ask the questions if you can't take action on the back of it. And I think a lot of organizations make that mistake where they ask questions, but they either don't listen to the answer, or they've heard the answer, but they're not actually willing to put into place, to actually take action on the back of what it is that their employees have said. And the other thing I find with a lot of organizations, rather than internally checking in with their own employees, they look to see what's going on in the market to try and replicate, and I get this all the time from my clients saying, oh, just wondering, what are other people doing in this area? We want to kind of and my answer always is, you need to check in with your own staff. You don't need to be looking at what's going on down the road and what your competitors are doing. Of course you can take ideas from what you can see publicly about what people are doing, but really what you need to do is check in with your own staff and see what it is that they want, what's going to work for them, especially now that we're in this hybrid working situation. I think, Elon Musk is mandating people back to the office. Other people are saying that's a terrible mistake. And, other people are kind of struggling with bringing people back to the office, or other people are totally okay with, like, it's okay if you want to work remotely some of the time as well. So there's kind of lots of chopping and changing going on out there from what I can see as well.
Absolutely. I think on the sort of taking ideas from other people, I'm a big fan of sort of learning from others, and we definitely don't all have it right, but I agree with you. And again, this is where data can be really useful. Diagnose your problem first.
Yeah.
So for example, we as an organization, very passionate, going back to your soapbox about women in leadership. And over the last couple of years, we have gone from sort of 25% to 55% women in leadership, and we've got 46% now across the organisation, up from late 20s, I think. And so we've done really well on that. And we meet or beat industry benchmarks on sort of lots of diversity criteria, all diversity criteria that are published from the industry. But we care about also being representative of where we're working. And so if you look at our Black, Asian, minority, ethnic stats, and I won't get started on what a terrible way that is of grouping people and a terrible capture of data, but because that's what you can benchmark, we do look at that. We've improved, and we are above the industry, and we're above the UK, but we're based in London, so we need to do more on that. And particularly in our technical teams, we haven't got enough young Black men, and we're now part of this GLA program to share learning across different organizations to be able to tackle that problem. But if we just went into generic diversity stuff, we could be tackling the problem of, like, I go to other forums where people have got 10% of women in leadership in our industry because our industry is rubbish at it. Like, I'm trying to tackle a problem I don't currently have when I have got problems in other areas that I need to sort of make progress in. And so I think that's why using the data and understanding your data and your trends and where things are at, how progression is moving, then you can say, right, so the actual problems I need to solve are these are the highest priority of those based on the business strategy, based on the time, effort, reward, etc. And then you go and you get your ideas from other people, and then you can test them out, rather than
blindly looking at what's everyone else doing.
Exactly, because it's got to be right for your context. And I mean, data ethics is a big area in sort of looking at using data in HR, and something I'm very passionate about. And that, like, we've created this good data guide which helps guide organizations through that, look at the KPIs they can be measuring to see whether they're progressing on it. But we're not giving them the holy grail of how to do it. We're giving them the guidance and the questions to ask themselves, because in different contexts, and you've got to take your own values as an organization, you've got to take your own context, your environment, your employees into account to make those decisions, because the same data model can be used in different contexts and be fine or disastrously bad. So you know, we built a data model to predict which car someone's going to buy next, right? Most customers are probably comfortable that you're not going to hassle me when I'm not in the market. You're only going to hassle me when I am. So you've used my historic data and some other information to predict that. Fine. You suddenly apply that to gambling, and we're now predicting it's the same data model, but you're predicting who's going to gamble next. And then a gambling institution is going to contact them and encourage them to gamble. That's obvious. Nobody would think that's okay. And so it's not really about the data models, it's about how you use them. And I think that's why, again, having HR people educated on this, because they can really start to play that organizational context. They can start to support on assessing data ethics, because technology does move faster than the law. So no one's going to give us the holy grail of exactly how we do this and how we do it right. We've got to make judgment calls. And I think that's, you know, there's a huge role for HR to play in this, but it really starts with them educating themselves, them getting confident about using data in their own day-to-day roles, to then see how that can work across the organization. The other thing you mentioned that I really wanted to pick up on was your stuff on hybrid working and this sort of new world of work, and how do you manage it? And we're data geeks, right? So in lockdown, I got really worried because we're quite an informal, flat structure. We sort of have hierarchy for, you know, need, but we don't operate on hierarchy, and we're not very siloed. And then suddenly lockdown comes, and really you're talking to your direct reports or your team, and I got really worried that we'd sort of become more hierarchical, we'd become more siloed. So being data geeks, I sort of went to my data team and said, I need you to solve this problem. And they built what we call the coffee roulette algorithm, which basically matched people randomly based, so we sort of optimized so you didn't match with your direct reports or your team. Our board joined in, so they really got to know more junior staff, which was great. And it was literally just informal coffee for 20 minutes. We started every week. We sort of made it every 2 weeks because we decided that was too frequent. And then we did some group ones as well, sort of putting different groups of people together. And like 97% of employees said that helped them feel really strongly engaged in lockdown. 87% said it helped them speak to a colleague that they don't normally have something to do with. And the mandate was absolutely, this is informal chats, like no agenda, not about work. But 53% said as a result of learning about people they wouldn't always talk to, their ability to do their jobs improved, and 61% learned more about what their colleagues' job entailed. And it's, you know, that's a really simple data thing. It took us no time to build. It was plugged into Outlook, so it automatically spotted when you had the gaps in your calendar and popped it in. You know, and it could work for if you've brought different brands together, for example, or if you've had acquisitions and you're trying to bring company together to be one, or you want your sales teams from two different sort of brands to connect so that they're not sort of cannibalizing each other's market. Like, you know, that can work really well. And it doesn't matter then if people are in the office or they're remote, because they can connect online. And it's something really simple, but I think it just shows that you don't have to have this sort of huge data transformation of HR to just use data to do something really small, to support employee engagement, to sort of support the new hybrid way we're working, and to hopefully up your happiness at work, right?
Well, there's a couple of things there, Natalie, that I'd love to just kind of to illustrate back to you, maybe if I can, is the idea that I think with hybrid working, the danger, and with remote working especially, the danger is that people will lose visibility if they're not in the office, especially with those senior leaders. So it's great to have that option to connect with people at board level, you know, with someone who's maybe not in the office, or someone who's more junior. And the other thing that you mentioned as well is that you were doing it every week and you realize actually that's a little bit too frequent. So you're kind of watching out for what's going on, and then you're listening back to feedback and saying, okay, we need to change this. And I think that's something maybe that organizations struggle with as well, that they're not listening for that feedback, or they're doing something and saying we have to do it at this frequency, when actually you just need to modify, you need to be agile and change it as it goes on, and listen to what people are actually saying.
And I think there's also lessons from sort of other ways data has been used to help you with that, right? So if you look at product people, they all have customer success functions. How a customer success person does their job is to look at the data of your usage of their product, where you're spending time, where you're not. Is there a dashboard you never use? Is there a sort of widget you're drilling into? Are people always like logging out after a certain point? Does that mean there's a problem? And they sort of use that data and analyze it to then be able to suggest, oh, look, actually you're finance team never use this. I think maybe you might need to do some more training with them. Would you like this training package? Or, actually, we don't think, you said that this was really important. Nobody uses it. So let's not develop that. Let's develop this one instead, because this is the piece that everyone goes to. And you can do the same with your HR stuff. So, you've put these interventions in, and actually there's probably loads of ways it's really easy to track them and capture that data without even having to hassle people to ask. Because particularly now we're working online a lot, actually there's a digital footprint of what we're doing, right? So we can see usage of things in a way that we couldn't before. You couldn't capture it. And that helps with inclusivity. So for example, you can analyze, say, Microsoft Teams behavior and see who's in conversations, and not because you're like super nosy, but because you can then see which of the meetings that key decisions are being made in, and actually who's attending those meetings, and then who's sort of active in different networks in chats. And because the risk with being remote is actually inclusivity is getting worse, not better. And however diverse a workforce you have, it doesn't matter if they're not in the room when you're making the decisions.
Exactly.
And in the virtual room, I should say. And so actually data can again help you to sort of track a measure of inclusivity by actually, are we including these people in the meetings? Are we including them in the decisions? And do we have enough progress? Are certain networks being formed in the company and others not? And how do we create the right nudges to change that, so that maybe our new employees who have never worked in the office have actually got a lot less connections than the ones who have? Or maybe we've got a hybrid workforce, and again we see the ones that are remote don't have the same connections, or the ones that are remote have better connections. So how do we then listen to that and respond to that, run a focus group to agree some things, to test things out? And it's not sort of about employee surveillance, but it's very, I knew somebody who they basically realized that hadn't realized that this person was still working for them, and they were still working for them 6 months later. The CEO said, well, not great of us, really, was it? But they had so little connection with anybody in the business. It just wasn't happening. And obviously they weren't getting their money's worth out of that employee, because no one was connecting with them, but they were still paying. And that's a really extreme example, but it's not uncommon. And so but it's also important because you can use some of these tools to also check in that people are taking the breaks that they need to, because
it's the opposite. It's not checking in on how much people are doing and what keystrokes they're taking, but rather the opposite. I'd love to know, Natalie, before we wrap things up, do you have any solid examples that you can share, without naming specific organizations, of implementing or using data to make better decisions, or to affect transformation in organizations?
So we did some great work, which we really enjoyed, with a financial services institution last summer, for example, who were really, really keen to look at the diversity. And so that was about analysing progression of different diverse cohorts. And what was really interesting from that was they actually realised that they put so much effort into initiatives, but actually their picture was getting worse on women. And we were able to identify exactly where, first of all, that actually there weren't enough women going into the hopper to change things, but also where they were losing them and what to. And we also identified that when women stayed, they were their most valuable employees. So it creates also the financial case to have, even if the board don't care, there's a financial argument for it, which supports the business case to invest in initiatives. But the biggest thing that women were leaving for was education. And so actually what they were able to then do is put in place a program that enabled you to study alongside your job, and made allowances for that and supported you to do that, which could quite easily tackle the biggest reason they were losing women. So it's a really small sort of snippet of an example, but just goes to show that it can lead to really, really good understanding, direct action, and then hopefully start to reverse those trends, which of course they need to keep monitoring over time. It's not the only thing they're implementing, but a really clear example. So that's one good example. Another really interesting example is about sort of where you overlay data sets together from different teams. And this is where one of our clients overlaid their manufacturing data with their HR data, and suddenly saw that the reason that they were having to do rework in their manufacturing pipeline because of quality, which obviously costs them money, not doing it once, having to redo it, was because of absence. And that was only picked up because it was overlaid with the HR data set.
Oh, interesting.
But then they were able to say, so then you say, well, are people unhappy? Is that why they're absent? But then you're able to say, okay, so one, we can start to predict when absence is going to happen. So then we can make sure we've got temporary employees and etc. to make sure that the production line runs. But more importantly, let's start to look at the underlying causes for that absence. So is it because the World Cup's on and no one shows up because they're sitting at home watching TV, right? Is it because there's problems on the trains and so people give up and go home? Or is it because it's people who aren't moving stations and so therefore bored? Or it's because people are moving stations and therefore a bit lost? Or the person who did their induction is a common denominator. And then actually, do we need to look at how that person delivers induction, or their manager is a common denominator? And do we need to support them with some more people and development training, do a little bit more digging into how those relations are working? So it's another really good example of actually just a simple overlay of data sets, spotted how they could make sure that they saved more money and got things off on time, but B, were able to then sort of dig into the root causes and tackle the real people related issues, which would lead no doubt to a happier workforce, because absence is also a sign of potential churn risk. So then it also then leads to retention. So yeah, just a couple of very different examples, but I hope give a bit of a flavor.
Yeah, really insightful. Thank you for sharing those. Now, the question I ask everyone who comes on the podcast, Natalie, what does being happier at work mean to you?
So for me, I just think we spend so much of our time at work, and you've got to enjoy what you do. And of course, there's bits of all of our jobs that are frustrating, irritating, boring, but they should be the minority, and you should get joy from what you do. And that looks different to different people. Different people thrive in different environments.
Absolutely.
But for me, like, you've got to get up most mornings and sort of want to go to work. And sort of my test, I think, when someone said to me, oh, what would you do if you won the lottery? I said I'd buy the business and grow it, not I'd give up work. And I think for me, that was a sign that I am in the right job and I am happy at work. And we work very hard to try and make our team happy at work as well and create the right balance. But being happy for everyone means different things. So it's about finding the right fit for you. And that's why, interviewing is so important. It's a two-way process, because it's not, the same job, the same culture, the same circumstances are not the right thing for everybody. And that doesn't mean success or failure. That's just about understanding yourself, understanding what works for you, understanding where you get your energy and what takes away your energy, and finding the fit with an employer where actually most of what you do gives you energy, doesn't take it away.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, speaking my language now. And if people want to connect with you, if they want to find out more about what you do, what's the best way that they can do that?
So I have a really horrible surname, but the good thing about that is there are not many Natalie Cramps. So you can find me really easily on LinkedIn, and also at our website, which is www.profusion.com. But please do reach out to me. Also, by the time this is launched, we will have a research which is about what employees are demanding. So I'd be really happy to share that with anybody if they want to reach out to me. And thank you.
So we can put a link to that in the show notes as well. So if you want to check out the show notes, the link we can share that directly there. Yeah, brilliant. Great. Thank you so much. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, right up my alley, talking all things data and how we can use it to create happier working environments. So I really, really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.
I love chatting to you. Thank you for having me.